So it was a Saturday, doing some stuff at home and that sort of thing. I've been on the volunteer fire department for probably about 7 years, and I'd just taken a leave because I just got into politics and that sort of thing. And so we kind of got a call out of a bunch of us that, hey, there's a fire outside of town and we need to mobilize some resources. And so we went down to the fire hall to see how we could help out. We ended up concentrating east of town is where we spent our time, and actually fought fire there all through the night kind of thing, and went till about 9 o'clock the next morning. And then, slept for a couple hours, and then the feeling was, hey, actually things are picking up again. It's getting hotter. There's more fire developing, and so we went back into the field and stayed in the field there fighting fire until about 9 a.m. the next morning. So
we had a call that we had a fire started southwest of town, up in the bush, and it didn't look good because the wind was blowing the wrong way, so it was blowing towards our hamlets on South Shore. And if you remember, there was no slowing it down at that time either. And on the way to help fight that one, we had the fire broke out here in Poplar Lane, east of town. That's when things got black. I've never seen anything like that in my life. Where you look down the road, you can see 100 feet, and it's pitch black. You could see nothing. Just never seen that before. I've been on the fire department for 30 years, and that was the first time I'd ever seen that burning BAM, and just balsam fir. So we knew.
Driving the fire truck through it.
Yeah, driving the fire truck.
It was crazy.
Get a guy walking in front of you holding flares so you can see where the road is. I was with the same outfit with Tyler. We were fighting fire in Poplar Lane here. We're trying to get everything out that night. All night. And I think at 8:30 in the morning, I got spelled off by a couple other members from our crew out of the Flatbush area. So me and my partner went home, had some breakfast, had a shower, pager went off. We had another fire on the south end of the MD. So we were off again until the next day sometimes.
Just happened by chance. It was the day that we were having one of our assemblies. And at our First Nation, we've taken ourselves out of the Indian Act. So our assembly is where we make our legislation as our exercise of our Section 35 rights. So all the adult members of the community were there, a vast majority of them. And we were going through some legislation, going through our second reading, line by line of a legislation that was on the table. And we noticed the fire trucks, ambulance, and police were just flying by because they're in our boardroom, which is also our assembly chambers. There's a large window. So we just kept seeing these going, there's something going on. It was kind of weird. And for some reason, the phone just kept ringing at the office, which is very unusual because it's a Saturday. We're never open. And nobody really figured out what was going on. And then finally, somebody from emergency operations out of the province somehow got a hold of my cell number and called me up and explained what was going on. So we had to adjourn the assembly. And then we were told we're on evacuation. We weren't on notice because we're not a part of the town, but we're adjacent with the MD. So because of our proximity to Poplar Lane where you guys were, we were told we had to evacuate. And we evacuated to the town. So we had a hotel here in Slave Lake, and so we're all in the parking lot, and it was pretty chaotic. Nobody knew what was going on, and so we just waited, and eventually they said, well, you should be able to go back to your home. So we went back that evening, and we were just about having supper when got a call again. No, the wind's shifted again. You guys have to get out. So we were evacuated back to town, and we spent the night at the hotel, and we waited, and then we just waited. And then finally the next day, everybody at the reserve, we had enough time that we got packed up, and wasn't until the next day when fires actually were threatening the town, we got evacuated. And basically it was the memory of how chaotic it was, and you could just sense the panic in the air. We were sitting by the hotel, and the propane tanks, barbecues were popping all over. They're blowing up, and I heard the comment that was, "Oh, the Sawridge truck stop blew up. It's devastated." And I was just giggling, and somebody said, well, what's so funny? I said, if that truck stop was to blow up, we wouldn't be sitting here right now. There's like something like 115 liters of gasoline. There's a propane dispenser with 500 gallons of propane. And if that lets go, trust me, it's not going to be just a pop. Driving through town, you'd be nice and clear, and then the wind would change, and all of a sudden you're in this giant cloud of smoke, and you're like, I hope everybody's okay. And without any communications, we don't have any fire services of our own, so we're kind of left in the dark. And that's one of the things that really hit me was in an area with 10,000 people, how alone our 50 people or so kind of felt.
You know, we stress to our residents, fire smart, try and keep, flammables away from your buildings, because, if you don't, you're going to lose them. I mean, you can't slow it down. We found that out here in the brand new office that burnt down while we're in part of it because of a cedar mulch, more or less, in the flower beds. And I mean, the sparks got in it, poof, guess what, gone. But for us, I mean, everybody knows about fires. We're slowly getting the message out about ATV uses on the dry seasons to try and keep them out of the bush, as much as you can, because they start a lot of fires. Man-made fires, I think, account for probably 70% of our fires or better. So, and we know that. So if we all do our part, maybe we can cut that down to where we can live with it. But like I say, other than that, we've got a well-trained fire department, regional fire department, and they got lots of resources. They pull each other in if there's fires. You don't have just the town fire department. You get Widewater, you get Smith, you get Flatbush. They'll all come in, for big fires. So we work together well. And like I say, other than that, there's not a lot we can do. We try and influence a little bit of the logging activity to make sure they're taking out the heavier timber close to residential areas. But fire smart's probably been our number one thing to try and protect our hamlets and take the fuel away from it. That's the big thing. So we don't have that again.
Forest fires were always a part of the environment here, and this wasn't the first time town has ever been threatened in the past. And you always feel like we're surrounded by a lake. How bad can it get here? We'll just surround and drown, and away we go. And you start to realize the stupidity of that statement. And so after the fire, it was really a thing that we bought into Fire Smart. We always had this regional fire department that we worked together, and I think they work even better now, and not even just like these departments working together regionally, but like working with forestry in the province and so on and so forth. So that relationship has got even stronger. But a lot of it is about education with our residents. And I see Joe's house, and he stacks all of his. He's got a wood fireplace. Lots of people have that up here, wood stoves, and he's got 3 cords of wood stacked against the side of his house. Maybe there's a different strategy that we could use there to make it a little bit safer for him. And so, we've taken that even further beyond education and started building that into some of our planning and development and how we build our communities. And but it's a tough thing. It adds costs and memories get short and people forget. And as communities evolve, people come and people go. And so there's a number of people that live here now that weren't here then, and they don't get it. They hear the stories and they see the pictures, but then the thought is always it'll never happen again. And then you look for McMurray, it happened a couple of years later, and so you have to keep refreshing them that this is important. And we talk about this type of season now. You start talking about like in an event of emergency, are you prepared? Do you have your go bag basically ready to go, and what's important, what isn't important? And so I think it's really changed the communication that we have with our people, with our residents. But it's the immediate things, but it's also that long-term planning about how do we do a better job with our community and the environment that we live in, because we chose to live in a forest. Like, this is going to be something that exists for a long time, and we don't want to just level that forest, because that's not what we signed up for up here. But additionally, it just creates another hazard. And so it really comes down to that education with your residents, for sure.
What has changed in my leadership since the fires is the realization that being an island isn't all that great sometimes. And it really brought to light the need for preparedness prior to the fires, we didn't have an emergency plan per se. And because of that, we were in a much better position to deal with the pandemic when it struck for us as a First Nation, because now I actually had an emergency plan. And because of the relationships built with our neighbors, the town, the MD, the government of Alberta, we were now on the radar, which wasn't there prior. So when the pandemic hit, it was very quickly, we got a call from the Rudy Parento, who is the field officer for emergency services for the Treaty 8 First Nations at the time. And there was help right off the bat. So here's a template. Let's get a pandemic plan. Let's initiate your soul. Like prior to that in 2011, when the fires happened, it wasn't until 2 weeks later the province says, oh, you should declare a soul so you can get some recovery money to help with any damage. Prior to that, it was, what's a soul? Not, other than a fish, I don't know, right? So, that has changed a lot. As well as there's more of a spirit of cooperation that has been born out of the fire. So, out of every bad thing, sometimes something good comes out. And I really think that the relationship between the town, the MD, and the First Nation has really done a lot more for everybody than just having a relationship. Some of the knowledge and history that's transferred to each entity as we have worked forward throughout the time has turned it from a more of a standoffish relationship to an actual relationship where I can honestly say the mayor, the Reeve, and I are friends. We can meet and talk about things that aren't politically driven or a hard subject matter.
When they are a hard subject matter, it's a lot easier to talk about it. And so, it was so funny. We didn't have a very in-depth relationship with the Sawridge First Nation when I got started in politics, but we had this thing called the Intermunicipal Committee that I was so excited. So there's only certain council, the mayor goes and then a couple of councilors, not like all of council. And I was so excited to get on this committee because I was really excited to understand that politic place and just kind of the dynamic that was going on there. And I go in for my first meeting and I was so defeated, and I left so mad because there's so much posturing going on that you didn't really say anything. All the stuff that we talked about as a council before we went in, none of us said it when we're actually in it. And after the second meeting, I was so mad. I was just like, why do we even have this? Like, we don't want to talk about anything. We're too scared to bring up anything, or nobody has the actual in-depth conversations. Whereas now, there ain't much going on in our world that we don't share with our neighbors, whether it pertains to them or not, just so that they know and we're all on the same page. And so I don't feel like there's any secrets. I don't feel like there's any political hidden agendas, and it is way easier to get things done. And echoing the chief's sentiments there, like, we get so much more done together than we ever would have got done individually. And so I appreciate that we have our relationship, our friendship has evolved to a point where we're all in that level of comfort. Like, it's a pretty good feeling, actually.
I mean, this was not a wonderful thing that happened to us other than the spin-off benefits we've got by learning to know and work with each other. As far as the actual incident itself, this is not a celebration of that. That was something none of us will ever forget. But it's nice to see where we've rebuilt probably 95%, or better. We have a few endeavors we worked on together, a regional water line, we've got a legacy center. We've done a few things together, so kind of cemented our friendship. And I mean, we learned different ways to deal with each other. We don't vote in favor or opposed. It's always, can you live with it? That's the question. That's a new world. We're trying to share that with some of our neighbors now and expand this a little bit. But no, I think we've learned a lot out of it. We have more opportunities. Our communities are rebuilt now. It's actually looking pretty good for us.
I don't want to celebrate it, but I want to acknowledge the fact that I think that we're leaps and bounds ahead of where we were, and I think we're even a better community for it. I look at the things we rebuilt most of the homes and the structures that were lost within a couple of years. We invested in our streets, but we had these things that will last long after. The water line. We talk about a water line as it's a pipe in the ground, but it literally improved our access to clean drinking water and took out some of the liability stuff that we had. And it'll last 100 years. I'll be dead, my kids will be dead, and my grandkids will be dead, and there'll still be something that had a monumental piece. The fact that this relationship, if we can keep this kind of communication going with councils in the future, because this is an elected position, we will all change at some point and get our lives back, right? And then somebody else will take that, and so we hope that we've instilled that culture into our organizations and our people and our community that'll carry on, because I think it's a huge accomplishment. The fact, this legacy center that we have, that is a building that is co-owned by 2 municipalities, a First Nation, and a couple of non-for-profit groups. Like, it's huge. Like, that just doesn't happen. And so, it's still new. We're working through some growing pains with it, but it's a $20 million building. It has childcare in it. We have some office space in there, a performing arts theater in there, and this community space where community can gather. And it has, we built in some pieces there. It could be used as a reception, evacuation type center, depending what's going on. Like, those are huge accomplishments. And I just, being in the middle of it that day, waking up on that Monday morning after the fire and driving through the community and thinking, my gosh, how will we ever get anywhere? And to be 10 years later and see what we've done, geez, I don't feel depressed about that by any means.
It's a weird anomaly for me, the actual event of the fire, because the fire itself, that was horrible. The destruction, the confusion. But at the same time, it's a not to be too much of a cliche, but it was the birth of a phoenix. When you see what happened, it showcased the resiliency of all the people in the area. It also brought light to some situations like Fire Smart. Who knew what Fire Smart really was and what it could do for a community until we faced what happens when you don't have a Fire Smart community. And as well as for us as a First Nation, it's a point where we were more involved with our neighbors and with what's happening in our area. Prior to the fires of 2011, we never had any of our members or any of our government on any committees, such as a health committee, such as an economic development committee. Now we have that, and it's been for 10 years. So I think, it is kind of important to commemorate the event because it was the catalyst that started something new, at least for us. And I'm pretty sure it's fairly new for Canada at this point. I don't know of too many First Nations that have such a relationship with 2 municipalities.
Tell you the truth, it was thank God they were here. We were overwhelmed. We had a fire department and up fighting fire for 3 days. There was a bunch of zombies walking around that were left here in town. And no, we were, at least I know I was, really pleased to see them arrive. And they came in mass. It was nice. It made you feel like you belonged.
And, by that point too, we, the guys on the ground, you become numb to it, to be honest. And it's just, you're just kind of going through the motions and you're doing whatever. And we haven't slept in 2 days, and so we're doing our thing. But, the guys that come in and they're just like, what, like, where am I? It was nuts. And from big departments, big, city of Edmonton and city of Calgary and things like that, they'd come in and they just had never seen anything like it. And neither had we, but it was, to Murray's point, it was, it was obviously, it was a relief for sure. Like, just, you have to remember too, like, this came in and we're a volunteer department of, our biggest hall has 30 people. The average other ones are 15. And so maybe we got like 70 to 100 people if we're lucky, if they're all mobilized and working. And so, and then to have the government come in, because basically you transition from getting a fire out to like, okay, how do I rebuild my community? How do I get my people back? because we just threw 7,000 of them out of town, 10,000 out of this region, and we've never done that before. So, people are like, well, just have them come back. Well, we turned off all the power, we turned off all the gas. We'll just turn it on again. Well, I don't know if they left the stove on, and so you have all these logistical things that come up, and so it was very nice to have that provincial support to come in and say, okay, let's work through some of this. But very early on too, you recognize they've never had this kind of scenario either. So, it was very interesting to have like this learning curve together to try and figure out, okay, like how are we going to do this? And every day it was like, okay, here's the new issue. And it's always move the metric. Like you start out and you're like, okay, well, when can we have people back? I don't know, like 2 months maybe? And then it's like, okay, that's not acceptable. Well, we can do it in a month. Well, what would it take to do it in 2 weeks? And you just keep brainstorming and thinking of these different things. And
how are they coordinating this effort? Like, who took charge and said, we need a camp and set up for the RCMP. We need all these RCMP. This is all going to happen. And it just seemed to happen within a couple of days. It was just, I was a little bit amazed at how quickly it came together. I probably would have barged into the Emergency Operations Center quite a few days earlier, because I didn't show up till almost a week after, the weekend after. And I purposely stayed out because I knew what kind of chaos there was, and other than information, there was nothing more I could bring to the table. We don't have a fire department, we don't have a police department, we don't even have a health center. So we're basically, wait to see what happens, and then I would have probably come a little sooner, did a better survey of homes and make sure everything was still in place. And fortunately, we didn't lose any homes. We might have lost a shed or something, and that's about it.
It was all new to us. I mean, we'd had a few evacuations before in little areas, so we kind of had an idea what needed to be done. We had practiced emergency operations, some situation stuff with the fire department and whatnot before, but I mean, this is the real world. This was scary. And I don't think we could have done it a lot different than what we did.
I think you always do the best you can with the information you have at the time, and away you go. And so, if it happened again, would I do a bunch of stuff differently? Totally. It's because I'll learn from it, right? And so I got to tell you, the only thing I always regret, and I mentioned it earlier here, I wish I would have kept a diary of what my day was like for 6 months, because it would have been interesting to read through it now and talk about that. But for the most part, I think we did the best that we could with the resources that we had, the knowledge that we had, and I think the people that came to help us out did the best that they could. I think we learned a ton. I think we are way more efficient, way more prepared. The relationship is better, the communication is better.
Warning systems.
Oh, totally. Like, we're leaps and bounds over where we were before, but no regrets. There's a reason you get to where you're at.
The Tri-Council is basically formed to deal with the recovery. The province had something like $64 million put aside for recovery, but it was for the 3 jurisdictions. So we were told, you're going to have to deal with this together. We're not going to carve out who gets what. So we got together as the 3 councils and had some discussions. And I had brought up the issue. I said, not sure how this is going to work. How are we going to make decisions? Because we have the town on one side with a mayor and 7 council, and MD with Reeve and 7 councils members. And here's Sawridge with 3. And it's like, well, this feels like we're not going to really get anything out of this, because we're not going to be able to swing a vote unless the town and the MD were to fight, and then we're in the middle. And that's not always the best place to be unless you like to leverage politics. But one of the gentlemen that was working with us, that was seconded by the province, there suggested that we work on a consensus model. And we developed a kind of a modified consensus model, because in a true consensus, you actually could get stymied into doing nothing, because if you have to completely agree. So it was modified, and it was decided that instead of asking all in favor, for or against, the question was, is this decision or what direction we're going, is it something you can live with? And I think that's what, really kind of set the tone and the dynamic and got that tri-council moving forward and kind of put everybody on a level playing field. And I think that really helped develop the relationships that we do have now.
And so we all have our own ways of doing things. There's a lot of posturing that went on beforehand, and the first year I think we really struggled through it. They were trying to figure out what we were going to do. And then actually we kind of had a meeting without government there and just kind of had a heart-to-heart one day, and we went out for supper and went out of town, went out to the Bird Observatory and kind of said, okay, like, we actually want to accomplish something. This is how it has to work. We got to stop keeping score. We got to stop, trying to over-maneuver, over-leverage the other person. Like, if we're not all going to win, but as long as we don't lose, we should be okay. And so really changed the attitudes there, and then really started to see some progress that came out of it. But I was a huge doubter right at the beginning. Like, we have 17 elected officials, and all it takes is one person to say, no, I can't live with this, and all of a sudden, okay, we're done talking about it. Like, okay, that'll last 5 minutes. And so the way it works is that, if one person shoots it down, then what happens is that it has to be done for that meeting, and the next meeting it comes back, and then it becomes a consensus of council. So as
the other members of the Tri-Council had an opportunity to try to explain their position and convince the one naysayer as to why, or try to understand, or to see if there could be a modification of the decision so that it's palatable at the very least. And that was kind of how we worked on it. So it would come back to the table, I think it was 2 more times, and if we couldn't convince, then if we had to, we would go to a majority vote. So the threat of the majority vote, I think, is what kind of had people a little more flexible. I can keep saying no, but eventually I might be outvoted. So instead of just trying to get exactly what I want, if you change the motion or the decision and just a little bit so that I'm not left out, I can say I can live with it. I think that was kind of what really kind of was the real change in the consensus model.
And $64 million worth of projects over a few years, and only once did we ever have to go and something got kiboshed.
Well, even with the raw water line,
Totally.
there was times where it was like, well, no, you can't run it. We can't give you any more of the reserve. So to allow it to happen, the town and the MD talked to the engineer, said, no, we're going to have to re-engineer this and put it through an existing right-of-way. That was something that was, they said okay to that. So I was okay, I'm in agreement with that. And another thing we said was we'd like to be able to get some a line up to at least Bear Road, so in the future we can get water to our people there. So concessions were made all around, and I think that's really where the relationships really started to solidify once we started exercising that procedure, and we got to realize that yes, if you're willing to compromise a little, and if you're willing to give a little, we can get to the end game that we want.
Well, we've actually changed our outlook on how we do things a little bit too. I know we have. It's more when we look at projects, what's going on, more of the regional approach to it. Like if it's good for Sawridge or good for the town, it's probably good for me too, because I'm part of the region. And we get more industry, well, that does us all some good. So even this carrying over on this consensus model, I mean, we still use it today, and it's worked like 10 years. I think it's proven, that it does work, and it gives everybody an equal opportunity. And I think, to me, it's just the fairest system we've ever come up with.
One of the big ones is that we got $6.4 million from CAP, the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers. And so they basically said, hey, we want to do something to help your community. We raised all this money. And so we ended up leveraging a bunch more money. And in the end, I want to say we were up around 16 or $17 million that we'd end up coming up with. And so we had polled the community. We talked about what was needed, and it came through loud and clear that we needed community space, something for performing arts, and daycare was a huge issue, and space for them. And so we built this building, and okay, well, we have this money. We're going to build this building. Like, how's it going to work? Who's going to operate it? Who's going to own it? And so we created this company that has 5 owners in it, 5 directors, 5 board members or whatever. And we've got the town, the First Nation, the MD, and 2 non-for-profits, and just trying to understand how we all work together and manage that from that system, and even the way, like, town really isn't in the business of running businesses, whereas First Nations actually have a ton of experience with it. We have a ton of experience of dealing with the province, but First Nations have a ton of experience dealing with the federal government. We don't deal with them much. So it was very interesting to have all these little dynamics come into play and start to have some of those conversations and start to understand how these different entities did business. And of course, non-for-profits have a whole nother take on things and are run by board members and that sort of stuff that have different levels of experience. So, to see that now, there's like $20 million facility that we all co-own and manage together. Like, that one's huge.
The water line is probably a big one. The water line actually comes in one of our hamlets in South Shore, is where the intake is. So it comes out along rural municipality land till it hits the Sawridge First Nations, and then we have kind of a right away through there, or along the edge, and then it hits into the town. The First Nations actually get their water from the town. Our community of Poplar Lane actually gets water from the town. So I mean, it only makes sense that now we have access to a good water intake that'll stay clean year round. We don't have to worry about siltage in the river and an annual silt removal. So it saved us all money in the end and gave us a source of good, safe, clean water. So
Now that the water line is there, they've what they call dry hydrants that are there now. So now there's some water in case there is a fire. So that's added some benefit for us as we have a little more confidence in the safety, but it also does help with our insurance on our buildings, right? When you have fire suppression close by. So that was a big win. And again, as Murray had said, our water comes from the town. So the new water line kind of gets rid of that issue that we had in the years past with sometimes there was a blue-green algae bloom that the original water intake wasn't deep enough to stay below that because it's right in the mouth of the river. So that is, I think, is from a health and safety standpoint, is a big win for all 3 of the entities here today. We were working on some economic development issues over the last 10 years. We're part of a committee, and one of the things that we had talked about at one point was tourism and how that could be a new industry for us to look at and how to attract new dollars into the area and how it could be beneficial to us. And we had a couple of sessions with Alberta, Travel Alberta. And we had a couple studies done, and one of the things that they had talked about was one of the missing links in Alberta is Indigenous tourism. And so we talked about it, and one of the things that kind of come to light was, well, with our Tri-Council, it's a very small First Nation here, and it's going to be really hard for us to really do anything much with Indigenous tourism. And even when it comes to the non-Indigenous tourism, there's not a heck of a lot as a base here in Slave Lake, but the lake itself and the surrounding communities altogether, it was thought that, geez, maybe we should be looking at working on a partnership. So if we were to look at Indigenous tourism, can Sawridge do it alone? Absolutely not. But with the 5 First Nations along the lakeshore and Big Stone to the north of us, there's a wealth of history and culture that if we were to get together and work, maybe we could do something better in that realm, and to try to help coordinate. So we've been able to, we've kind of had other entities, municipal districts, kind of inquire about it. So I think it would be great to look at it from even an economic development standpoint. Is there other industry that we can bring into place to create the tax base and to get us off the roller coaster ride of the oil and gas and forestry industries? Because that's the 2 major industries that we work with, and it would sure be nice to be able to be a part of something that develops that. And it's because of our experience, I think, with the 3 of us, if we can bring this model and this type of work, collaboration with the other neighbors around us, I think we could really do something even bigger and better than the three we could.
The one thing that we've recognized from the Tri-Council is that the louder your voice is, the more chance somebody's going to listen to you. And so our voice is pretty loud when the three of us start talking and, we're advocating. And so, most municipalities, most First Nations are at the mercy of these parent bodies above them, whether it be the provincial or the federal government, there for funding and getting things done. We're at the mercy of their legislation. We're at the mercy of their funding. And so we have to work together to access those things and get our voice heard. And so I think there's huge potential. And if we can add voices to that, to get an even louder voice, to shine a bigger light on this region, I think is huge. And economy and economic development and tourism, I think, are some of the easiest potential ones that we have. But, I think it's going to help us with healthcare. I think it's going to help us with highways. I think it's going to help us with relationships. I think it's going to help us with our own learning and understanding our own history. And I think it has a huge amount of potential just because we've seen it here. I will tell you, though, I've been one of the ones that was most apprehensive not to expand it because we've been talking about it for a while. And it's because when you have a good thing, you don't want to mess it up. And I can tell you that realistically, lots of times adding more voices and opinions doesn't speed things up or sometimes get you to a smarter spot. But in recognition, our neighbors that we're working with now, there's two profound things there. One, we have a lot in common. We have a lot in common. There's a lot of information that they have and stuff that they know that I don't. I think together we can do more together than we do apart. The other one is that, we sometimes forget in society that it is important that your neighbor is doing well. If your neighbor is doing well, likely you have a better chance to succeed and your life is going to be easier. And when they're not, your life is going to be tougher. And so, I think there's this fundamental spirit that we need to extend beyond our own borders to say it is in our best interest to make sure that our neighbors are whole and doing well. We have a role to play in that. And so I'm kind of excited by this big group now because I think we have huge potential to be able to do something with that.
We are all susceptible to some sort of disaster or another. And I'm sure it could happen again because the moment you don't think it'll happen again, your Mother Nature's going to give you a little slap across the face and wake you up. And could it happen again? Absolutely. Would it be a fire? Maybe not, but it could be something. And would things be different? Absolutely. I think you would see a coming together of the three entities to take this head on from day one. I think we're in a far better position as far as our emergency preparedness, our planning. I think our communications are light years ahead of what they were before. I've had several instances when something's happening in the town, I get a call on my cell phone any time of the day from the mayor, just a heads up, this is what's happening. And that's greatly appreciated. And I think if there was another disaster, I think we'd come out of it much better than we did after this. I don't think things would take near half the time to get us motivated to work together because we're there.
Yeah, no, I think communication would be the most fundamental thing, and it's communication amongst each other. It's communication amongst our organizations, right? Because we have tons of staff too that all have to work together and have that communication. But even just how we communicate to our residents, I think would be better. We're more prepared. We're more agile. We're more confident that we can deal with stuff. I think that's what comes from resiliency is that you gain this confidence that, hey, the next one isn't so big. That hill isn't so high. It doesn't, it looks worse than it is here, guys. That's one thing I impart upon my own children is that, we got to try stuff. We got to push outside our limit because it's never as bad as you think it is. And if we do it together and we learn on it together, things will be better and easier in the future. And so I have no doubt there's going to be adversity in the future. There's going to be stuff. And some of it's going to be big. But I feel empowered the fact that we have more knowledge, more energy, more resources to overcome it. It all doesn't actually seem as bad as it used to.
It's our responsibility to make sure that councils that follow us don't lose this. You know, we need to make sure that we maintain this communication, trust, know that when something happens, we have to work together. I mean, we're regional, damn it. We don't just live in an island. You know, we're all together in on this. So, and we have to make sure we impart that to councils that follow us.
I think it's important that we thank the people of this region, and we thank the people of Alberta, Premier Stelmach at the time. You know, the amount of resources that we got. You know, I think I'm very proud of our group, and I'm very proud of the work that we did. And it was our energy that took that pile of resources and got us to where we're at now. However, you know, I got to thank all those people that created that pile of resources to be able to do that, because not every municipality, not every organization, community has that ability. And so, you know, to Canadians, to Albertans across there that rose to that occasion and supported us in our time of need, I can't thank you enough, and I want you to know that your money was well spent. I'll also say in 10 years, you know, there's this Albertan spirit, I think, that exists. And, you know, we always say it's more prevalent in northern Alberta, but I think it's across Alberta. There's this Albertan spirit that you roll up your sleeves and you get the work done. And we had that here, and you know, people were just chomping at the bit. They're foaming at the mouth to get here and get here and help and make things better than they were. But it's easy too. The problem, I think, with the Alberta mentality is we burn ourselves out too. And so we lost some good people along the way too. Some faces changed, and you know, those people are living outside of this region now. They're living in other communities, or their role was fulfilled, or however that worked out. That I just want to say to those people that, you know, this 10 years isn't just for us. It's for you to say, you know, thanks. You know, thanks. I know, you know, your life changed because of your involvement here, and maybe it got better or maybe it got worse. That we wouldn't be successful here without what you did for us then. And from the bottom of my heart, from the bottom of our community, I appreciate what you did for us.
I think the provincial government, all the Albertans that chipped in, and you know, we're all neighbors. We all have to live here, and I hope that someday that this model that we have will be adopted throughout the province, and First Nations people and the communities can start to work a little closer together, get a little better understanding. Because one of the things I did learn throughout this whole process is, regardless if it's the First Nation or the town or the MD, we all face the same issues, albeit maybe from different standpoints. But we all have issues with lack of housing, lack of services. And it's only if we start to work together that we can start alleviating some of these problems. And I think that's a lesson that I'll take with me as I move forward in this life.
Yeah, and the other thing I would add is that, you know, I think for people that aren't from here, to understand that we live in this beautiful spot on this beautiful lake with beautiful beaches and surrounded by trees and forests. You know, as awful as a pandemic has been, I'll tell you, I don't regret being in Slave Lake. I think there's no better place to be. That we've got space and we've got nature and we've got environment in here. And, you know, and I think it's important that people outside of Alberta, or you know, just outside of this region mainly, understand that we are still here, and we're better than we were before. And so come see it. Come spend some time here, because I don't think there's a better place on earth. And, you know, we'd also like to thank the Rotary Club of Slave Lake Public Library for hosting us and allowing us to do this here.